Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Fifth Wall's second 15-minute focus. Appreciate you finding your way. Apologize for any technical difficulties with the first link. If you are here, obviously you found the other link that we posted. And then if you are talking to anyone that was going to join and they're having difficulties, please relay the message. We sent out that email about 15 minutes ago, and then also in the comments of the old link, we were posting the new link. So let's get to it. So for those of you that are here, you're here to hear about nonprofits and about why they need to consider their cyber exposure is a serious issue. Nonprofits historically have been a difficult conversation in this topic because they don't see themselves at risk, which is kind of funny. And I only say that because I've heard the phrase, why would someone attack a nonprofit? Why would someone attack us? On actually both sides of the fence. So I've heard that while in the room with a producer who's talking to their client, and that's what the client's saying back. I've also heard it while being on the phone with a client after the fact, after they've been breached, and they've said, why would someone attack a nonprofit? Why would someone attack us? We're, so-and-so. We had a breach about a month ago, a little over a month ago, with actually a well-known nonprofit. And I was on the phone with their CEO, and that was exactly what was said. And they were dealing with a ransomware event. So, and I can get more into some of the claims details later on to kind of drive that home. But I want to focus on a couple elements for this focus. Why a nonprofit is a target. And then let's take that and gear that towards how you can use that into working with a nonprofit to better understand their exposure. And then in the end, understand the value of creating a safety net, getting a legitimate full-scale cyber policy to cover that risk. So the first part, let's talk about with a nonprofit, and we can speak generally because most nonprofits operate the same way, but the data they collect, whether they realize it or not, it is very valuable. Okay, so we look at not only just the employees that are there, which is true for any business, but they have a lot of volunteers, they have a lot of part-time, full-time. There's usually a decent amount of turnover depending on the business. They have a lot of donor information. Okay, so they not only they have donor information, but they have a lot of information on the donations themselves. So, and depending on how they collect those donations, there's even another level of exposure. And so the data that they house, whether they understand or not, it is really valuable. Now let's tie that in with the accessibility of that data for nonprofits. Then you've got a perfect storm. So put yourself in a hacker's shoes. And we talked about professional services 2 weeks ago. Professional services, now they have a much more clear evident exposure, but you're also dealing with someone that's, or you're dealing with a business that you could make an assumption probably better understands that exposure, right? They understand the data they have and the way that they're viewed, you would hope. With a nonprofit, you not only have probably some misconceptions of the data they hold, but then also their preparedness is skewed as well. So the big thing with nonprofits right now is hackers know they don't consider themselves a target. And that in itself actually makes them that much more of an easier target. And so sitting down with a nonprofit, sitting down with someone that's part of an organization that's trying to understand, why do I need to buy cyber insurance? That would be one place I would focus, candidly. Talk about the data, say, well, let's just get on the same page. What you guys do and what you collect is valuable. But in addition to that, you're viewed as an easy target. And therefore, the trend is going up. Nonprofits are being targeted. They are being targeted specifically for the reason that they know they're an easy target. They're not investing into their infrastructure as they should be for the most part. Those that are typically are probably the larger ones, right? They have probably the right people in their ears to guide them. But for many of these that are smaller, they're not getting the level of influence they should be to be making those investments. Another layer too is when you go at the board level, they're even further connected from that. And so they're probably not getting approval for certain expenses around their IT budget than they should. So I recognize talking to nonprofits, probably not the easiest conversation, but when you look at your role, look at yourself at the main risk advisor in their lives for the most part, it's really important this is a topic you bring up. because for a lot of businesses, yes, it's probably more clear and apparent. Because it's not as clear and apparent for these nonprofits, all the more reason you need to be the voice of reason to bring these things to their attention. So let's take that and now tie that into, well, what would a cyber policy do for a nonprofit? And maybe you've got your client's attention at this point. Maybe they're a prospect and you've been able to get them into a different way of thinking than their current agent has before. Well, now how do you tie that to the solution being a cyber policy? Well, this is going to be true for a lot of the clients you talk to. It's understanding the nature of a cyber breach, but for a nonprofit, it should be a little bit of a harder journey because of their lack of preparedness. So let's use one of our claims examples. Is we had a nonprofit not too long ago that was breached, going through it, and it was a ransomware virus. Luckily, they had coverage, which is great, but they still had a tall mountain to climb because they were slightly sophisticated enough. They had backups, which is great, but they didn't have the technical resources to help them right out of the gate. Now, we were able to help them, but it was evident that they were already kind of a step behind, not having really IT readily available. So when it came to gathering data, doing backups, trying to get themselves back on course, it was a pretty difficult path. So I would kind of explain just from a start, and you could use ransomware. Ransomware is probably it's the lowest hanging fruit when explaining an exposure to a client or prospect, because it really has no boundaries. I mean, really, if you're a business in today's day and age and you operate with technology, you can fall victim to ransomware. But just trying to get through the path of figuring out what happened, understanding and getting back up and running, all of those costs you can kind of lay out, right? So let's run a hypothetical. This is a nonprofit. They're breached. Let's say it's ransomware. You can explain what that would look like, right? All of their technology. And you can also ask how heavily do they rely on their technology right now? So run that scenario to say, what would happen? What would you do? Let's walk through this. This is a part of evaluating this type of exposure for you. And then drawing that through, okay, we get hit with the virus. Do we pay the demand? Do we not? Do we have the money to pay that? Let's say we don't, then are we able to get back up? Do we have backups? Do we have proper backups? Do you have the resources to do that, right? Is there a third party that you know that would be able to do that for you, or at least assist you? Was information exposed, right? So we just said about the data, they have donor information, they have volunteer information, they have employee information, they've got a lot of information. How much of that information was exposed? And if it got in the hands of a bad actor, do you need to provide notification to those that may have been impacted? Well, guess what? Now you have to involve a lawyer, right? Lawyers are going to want to know, well, how did this all come about? Do we know information? They're going to need to get forensics involved. Let's say it does escalate and there was an exposure of PII. Then they have to provide notification. They have to pay for credit monitoring. So you can kind of go down that road. And I'm not saying this is a scare tactic. This is the legitimate, this is the path of a typical cyber claim in that scenario. And I would really focus on the level of preparedness, right? So one route for a nonprofit is they could start investing in a lot of technologies and human capital to reduce their risk of it actually happening. And you hopefully can talk candidly about the legitimacy of that path, or evaluate the potential of creating a safety net. Hopefully they can do both. Hopefully they're able to do both, and you can advise them on both. But hopefully explaining it in that way can make it a little clearer as far as what that would look like for them. One last thing, and I did say this, I said this towards the end of our last 15-minute focus. I want to make sure I'm continuing this as a theme. We're picking industries, business classes that are sometimes the more difficult ones. Sometimes they're easy. Professional services, in my opinion, is probably a little bit of an easier conversation. A nonprofit is a much harder conversation. It is certainly worth it as the risk advisor, as your role to the picture you're to be painting for your client. This is a really important one. Even if it's a small nonprofit, a cyber attack, particularly right now where a lot of businesses are as far as being fragile, could very easily be the sweep to the leg that would take them out completely. right? And so this is the time to have that conversation. This is the time to get serious. This is the time to schedule that meeting and actually have a conversation about cyber. And if you need backup, you know where to find us as far as having that conversation, being prepared, claims examples. And that is really where I would guide it, is just being informative and being educational, and hopefully they can make an informed decision. Real quick, let me check the comments to see if there are any questions. Right. And right now I'm not seeing any. So I think for the most part for nonprofits, that's my focus. And let me just reiterate, I would look at and highlight what they collect and what they have is valuable. Okay. And remember, my evaluation when I look at exposure is really simple. I look at data and I look at access. Now they do have access as well, and you can go that route. You can highlight the fact that they do have information on their donors, right? And they do have that information, and that can spiderweb, and they can use their organization as a lily pad to bounce to the next one, right? To go from one organization to another. That's certainly very realistic from a third-party liability perspective. But if you kept it just right in front of them, the data is probably where I would lean to make sure that they have an understanding that that is valuable. And many folks out there are going to want to get access to that. Two, highlight the fact the accessing that data is typically pretty easy for hackers when they look at nonprofits. So that combination makes them a pretty good target to go after, and a pretty easy target. So the lack of preparedness, the acknowledgement that most nonprofits don't have what they need to be able to be prepared, makes them an easy target. And then I would just finish it off by highlighting that, a little bit about the claims path. Run through a scenario. I typically pick ransomware, but you can pick something as simple as someone getting into the system and stealing information, whether they were aware of it at the time or not, but just getting into the server, exfiltrating PII, and then the nonprofit is essentially left with some privacy issues at the state and federal level where they have to act, right? And so would they know how to act, and would they have the resources to pay for what they would need to do? So, all right, so no questions here. We're coming close to the 15-minute mark. That's about it where I have, what I wanted to say about nonprofits. Next week, we're doing manufacturing. Is that correct, John? Or not next week, the week after. So please tune in. Please feel free to send this to anyone you know. We're really looking at this from, we want to be educational. We would want to be informative. We would really want to equip. Really want to help folks out. And if you know me, I love to talk. So if you give me an opportunity to talk about cyber, I'll take it. So hopefully you can join us next time. And if you have any questions, please don't forget, you can either put it in the chat. You can also submit through our website. If you're not familiar with Fifth Wall and you want to get familiar with us, go ahead and submit through our website. You can provide your information or reach out to you, or you can go ahead and submit in the chat. Either way is fine with us, and we're happy to make an introduction. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.